All right. So have you ever just like had that feeling, like something was going to happen before it did?
Oh, yeah,
Like almost like a sixth sense or some kind of premonition?
definitely. And it's a feeling that's fascinated people probably, since the dawn of time, right?
Totally. And today we're going to dive deep into, the idea of precognition, see if there's any like actual science behind those gut feelings.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there's actually this research paper from 2014 that really digs into this.
Okay.
It's called Feeling the Future Again. And it was published in the Journal of Consciousness Studies.
Catchy title.
Right. And what these researchers are proposing is that our unconscious minds might actually be able to kind of tap into the future.
Well, hold on. So you're saying like our brains are picking up signals from the future?
Well, that's kind of the idea. They're suggesting it might be happening at like a quantum level.
Quantum level. Okay. Now we're getting really out there.
Yeah. Yeah. I know it's a bit mind-bending, but at that level, like the typical rules of time and causality, they don't necessarily apply in the same way.
I'm trying to wrap my head around this. So are we talking like time traveling thoughts?
Not exactly time travel. Think of it more like ripples in a pond. If you saw those ripples moving backward towards like the source of the disturbance.
Okay. I can kind of picture that.
Yeah, that's kind of how this idea of retroactive influence is conceived.
Retroactive influence.
Yeah, it suggests that information from the future might be influencing events in the present, at least on an unconscious level.
Okay. I'm going to need like a lot more explanation on that one. But how do they even like test something like that?
So they did these 7 different experiments, and the whole point of them was to see if people could unconsciously avoid negative stimuli that were presented after they made a choice.
Wait, so they were like making choices based on something that hadn't happened yet?
Exactly. And get this, the study relied on subliminal images, so the participants weren't even consciously aware of what they were reacting to.
So they couldn't even see what they were supposedly like avoiding.
Exactly. They had this really clever masking procedure where these images were flashed for like a super short time, just 18 milliseconds.
That's like a blink of an eye.
Yeah, and they were sandwiched between other visual stimuli, so it made sure those images stayed outside of conscious awareness.
That's wild. Okay, so if they couldn't see these images, how could they be influenced by them?
Well, that's where this thing called the Orchor-R model of consciousness comes in.
Okay, that sounds complicated.
It is a bit. This model was proposed by a physicist, Roger Penrose, and an anesthesiologist, Stuart Hameroff, and they suggest that our unconscious thoughts might actually operate according to the principles of quantum mechanics.
Quantum mechanics, now we're really going down the rabbit hole.
I know, right? But the key idea here is that our unconscious thoughts might exist in this state of superposition.
Superposition.
Yeah, so imagine you're trying to decide between like 2 outfits in the morning, you know?
Happens to me every day.
Right, so you might be considering both options at the same time, even if you're only consciously aware of one at a time. That's kind of like superposition.
So it's like my unconscious mind is a quantum dressing room trying on all the possibilities.
Exactly. And according to this Orchard-R model, this quantum superposition collapses into a specific outcome, based on different things like our innate drive to avoid harm.
Okay, so if I'm following you, our unconscious mind sees a negative image in the future, and it like steers us away from making a choice that would lead to that outcome, even if we don't consciously know why we're making that choice.
That's the hypothesis. And remember those 7 experiments we talked about?
Hmm.
Well, in a majority of them, the researchers found that participants did show a statistically significant tendency to avoid those negative images.
You mean they were actually choosing to avoid something they didn't even know was there?
That's what the data suggests, and it's interesting because these retrocausal effects.
Ritual call.
Yeah, they were small, but they were consistent across different studies. They tested it with different groups of people, even used different software programs to administer the tests.
So there's some evidence, even if it's subtle.
Mm.
Okay, but hold on. If our minds are tapping into the future all the time, why aren't we all walking around with precognitive superpowers? Shouldn't it be more obvious?
That is a great question, and it might have to do with this concept called signal degradation in the quantum model.
Signal degradation, like a bad internet connection to the future.
You could think of it that way. The idea is that only very weak unconscious signals might be capable of traveling back in time.
Okay.
And these signals, they're probably getting drowned out by all the other noise going on in our minds,
Like we might be picking up on bits and pieces of the future, but it's more like a faint whisper than a clear message.
Precisely. And that could be why these precognitive abilities, if they do exist, are so hard to detect in our everyday lives.
Okay, I'm starting to get the picture, even if it is a little blurry. But what do these findings actually mean? Do they, like, suggest that the future is already set? Or do we still have free will?
Ah, well, that's a question philosophers have been wrestling with for centuries, and these findings just add another layer of complexity to the debate.
It really makes you think about like the nature of reality itself, you know?
Absolutely. If our unconscious minds are tasting multiple potential futures simultaneously, are we actually influencing which future ultimately happens?
Okay, now my brain is officially melting multiple potential futures. Are we talking parallel universes here?
It's a popular interpretation of quantum mechanics. The idea is that there might be multiple realities existing in superposition, and our choices might determine which reality we end up experiencing.
Whoa, this is heavy stuff. So our actions today could be influenced by potential futures, and those potential futures are shaped by what exactly our desires, our intentions.
That's where Penrose's idea of non-random influences on quantum collapse gets really interesting. He suggests that our motives, our intentions, they might actually play a role in shaping which reality we end up experiencing.
Hold on, are you saying our thoughts, our desires could be influencing the fabric of reality itself?
It's a possibility, and it opens up a whole new set of questions about the power of the human mind.
This is incredible. We are officially in the deep end now, but before we get too lost in the quantum weeds, let's just take a step back and recap what we've learned so far.
Good idea. Take a breath.
So we started by diving into the world of precognition, exploring this idea that our unconscious minds might be able to sense and react to future events. We talked about this fascinating Orcher-Orr model of consciousness, which suggests that our unconscious thoughts exist in this quantum state of superposition.
Right, and that this superposition could be collapsing into reality based on our biological drive to avoid harm.
Exactly, and then there was this experimental evidence from Mayer and his team. They found these consistent, albeit small effects, suggesting that participants were actually avoiding negative stimuli even when they weren't consciously aware of them.
And we can't forget about the concept of signal degradation, this idea that only weak unconscious signals might be capable of traveling back in time, potentially explaining why these precognitive abilities aren't more obvious in our everyday lives.
Right, and then we kind of went down the rabbit hole with the concept of potential realities.
Yeah.
The idea that our unconscious minds could be navigating a multiverse of possibilities, subtly shaping our actions based on what those futures hold. Wow, that was like a whirlwind tour of some incredibly complex concepts.
Definitely a lot to unpack.
Absolutely. But even these like preliminary findings offer a pretty tantalizing glimpse into this potential intersection of quantum mechanics and human consciousness.
It's a truly mind-expanding area of research.
It really is, and I gotta admit, I'm finding it all incredibly fascinating. I'm also trying to wrap my head around the implications of all this. You know, if we really are feeling the future, what does that mean for our understanding of free will? Could we learn to harness these abilities?
Those are fantastic questions, and they're exactly what we'll be exploring in the next part of our deep dive.
It sounds like we've got a lot more to unpack.
We do. We'll delve into the philosophical and practical implications of precognition and discuss what this research might mean for our understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
Can't wait.
So, we were talking about our unconscious minds maybe dipping their toes into the future.
Okay.
Well, it makes you wonder about the implications, right? Like, what about free will?
Exactly. If like our actions are being influenced by events that haven't happened yet, does that mean our choices are already predetermined? Like, are we just puppets on a string?
It's a question that's been around forever,
Yeah.
right? Philosophers, scientists, they've been debating this for ages. And these findings, they just add another layer of complexity to it all. If I'm unconsciously avoiding something bad that's going to happen, did I actually choose to avoid it, or was it like already baked into the timeline? It's like a cosmic chicken or egg thing.
Totally. Okay, so free will is one big question mark.
Yeah.
But what about like the practical applications? If we could somehow tap into this unconscious precognitive ability, could we use it, to our advantage?
It's a tantalizing thought, right?
Yeah.
Imagine being able to anticipate danger or make decisions with a little extra future insight.
That'd be pretty handy.
Yeah, but remember that signal degradation we were talking about?
Like the bad internet connection.
Exactly. The signals are super weak, just unconscious whispers.
Right. So how could we ever actually harness these abilities if they're so faint?
That's the million-dollar question. It's one thing to detect these subtle effects in a lab, but translating them into something useful in the real world, that's a whole other story. It's not like we're going to wake up tomorrow with precognitive superpowers.
So no precognitive stock market tips anytime soon.
Probably not. But even if we could, there are some serious ethical considerations.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Imagine a world where everyone's walking around with precognitive abilities. Who has access to this knowledge?
Right.
How is it used? Could it be exploited, for personal gain or even worse, malicious purposes?
Exactly. It'd be like living in Minority Report with all the ethical dilemmas that come with it. The potential for both good and bad is huge. Like, on the one hand, being able to sense danger could save lives.
Right. But on the other hand, knowing someone's actions before they even make them, that could be used to manipulate people in some really messed up ways. It's a slippery slope.
It really is. And it's why we need to be having these conversations now as we explore, the frontiers of consciousness. The ethics are just as important as the science.
Agreed. So where do we go from here? We've got this intriguing research, some mind-boggling implications, but no clear answers. What are your thoughts on the future of precognition research?
Well, I think this Mayer study has opened up a really fascinating avenue of inquiry. We need more studies, bigger sample sizes, maybe even more sophisticated experimental designs to really get a handle on these effects. It's going to take collaboration from different fields, physicists, psychologists, neuroscientists, philosophers. All of them have a role to play in figuring this out.
It's a puzzle that needs all hands on deck. And who knows, maybe one day we'll be able to move beyond just feeling the future to actually understanding it and maybe even harnessing its potential.
I like the way you think.
But for now, I think it's important to just acknowledge the incredible mystery and complexity of the human mind.
Absolutely. This research may be in its early stages, but it offers a really tantalizing glimpse into the connection between quantum mechanics and human consciousness. It's mind-expanding stuff.
It really is. This deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about. I bet our listeners have some thoughts too. What are your takes on precognition? Does this research resonate with you? It sounds like when it comes to precognition, there are definitely people on both sides of the fence. Some are intrigued and others are like, yeah, right.
And that's healthy. A healthy dose of skepticism is never a bad thing, especially when we're talking about something as mind-boggling as seeing into the future.
Yeah, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, right?
Absolutely. But I think it's important to remember that we shouldn't shy away from exploring the unknown,
Right.
Like pushing the boundaries of what we think is possible. Science thrives on that kind of curiosity.
I agree, especially when we're dealing with something as complex as the human mind. There's still so much we don't know about what it's capable of.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into precognition, I want to leave our listeners with this thought. If our unconscious minds are really feeling the future, what does that tell us about the nature of reality?
Whoa, that's a big one.
Yeah.
It takes us right back to those age-old debates about free will versus determinism. Is the future set in stone, or are we constantly choosing between different possibilities?
It's like the universe is this giant choose-your-own-adventure book, and our unconscious minds are peeking ahead at all the different endings.
I like that analogy. It kind of highlights the idea that we might have more agency than we realize, even if it's happening on a level we're not consciously aware of.
It's a really mind-bending concept, and I think it's one that deserves a lot more attention and exploration. We've only just scratched the surface here.
Totally agree, and that's the beauty of it, right? The mystery, the unknown, it's what keeps us asking questions, keeps science moving forward.
Absolutely. Well, for anyone listening who wants to dive deeper into this, you can check out the full research paper by Mayer and his colleagues. It's called Feeling the Future Again, and it was published in the Journal of Consciousness Studies. You can also look into the work of Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff. They're the ones behind that Orchard R model we talked about.
Yeah, there's a ton of fascinating research out there for anyone who wants to explore the mysteries of the human mind.
So keep those minds open, stay curious, and don't be afraid to question what you think is possible. Who knows? Maybe one day we'll all be having precognitive coffee dates talking about the future. Like, it's just another topic of conversation.
That would be pretty wild.
Until then, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into precognition.
It's been a pleasure.
And don't forget to click like and subscribe to this Unlock Your Mind podcast. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the mysteries of the human mind.